I can't wait until I can show you off as my boyfriend and be able to say, see him? He's my boyfriend. And I think we'll be together within the year, but I hope much sooner. She was talking as if he was going to leave me. She told him if she left her husband, she would leave him in the house they shared, but my husband had no intentions of ending his marriage. He didn't know what to say, not having the courage to tell her it wasn't going to happen. He lied to her, telling her he hoped they'd be together one day. Suddenly things were getting serious, and he started to worry about how everything was going to play out. On the Monday night, 2 days pre-D-Day, they had training for work and she was very ill. He felt powerless and frustrated by not being able to comfort her and take care of her, as well as being very worried about her well-being. She left rehearsal early and he rang her on his way home to see how she was. She told him she was worse. He was worried sick. On the Tuesday morning, my husband found out she'd been taken into hospital. He rang her and she said they were running tests. He felt helpless. Later that afternoon, she used a new email account to talk to him without her husband knowing. Until that point, she hadn't cared enough to set up a method of contacting my husband privately. But now, she went out of her way to sneak behind her husband's back, simply so she could email my husband to tell him she missed him and loved him. My husband was overwhelmed with emotion for her and said the same back. He meant it this time. Things had changed. Now, he wanted her more than he wanted me, and was convinced his feelings for her meant his feelings for me had never been real. D-Day arrived and my husband left for work like any other normal day. I woke after a dream where my husband's friend told me my husband was seeing her. I was upset and rang him to tell him, and then I started checking his phone bill and asking questions. It wasn't the first time I'd been suspicious. He'd been different with me for weeks, but I was getting closer to finding out. He knew it was crunch time and he had to make a choice. He wanted all the lies and deceit to stop, and all he could think was that he needed to be with her. In hindsight, he looked at everything one-sided. He thought of her, someone vulnerable who needed him. He could not bear to let her down. He thought of the way he felt when he was with her, and also the work he loved. He could not see a good outcome if he left her and work, and in addition, he saw the chance of a new life with more freedom, with someone he thought totally understood him. He did not think about life without me. He simply chose what felt more attractive at the time. It was a snap decision he decided to run with, simply because he needed to end the lies. So, he sat at work, writing a letter. It was a long letter, a whole A4 sheet. He wrote that he had fallen for someone else and had to be with her. He said he didn't look for it, but that it just happened. And he said, repeatedly, that he needed me in his life, as a friend. Once the letter was written, he rang her. No plans had been made to leave their respective spouses. No promises. No nothing. My husband was in his own private hell, and while she wanted him to leave me, she had no idea it was coming. He rang her and said, "I am going home to tell my wife everything." She said, "Don't, I'll ring you back." Shortly afterwards, she rang him back and told him that she had come clean to her husband about everything. He said he was leaving there and then to tell me, and it was left at that. I was sitting in my bed with my laptop. I had satisfied my little niggle that my husband was cheating easily, because I would have put my life on betting he wasn't capable of such a thing. I had decided I was imagining things. Then he walked in, gave me the letter, and dropped to his knees in floods of tears, saying, "You were right." My reaction was wholly unexpected to him. He has assumed I would be hurt and angry. Angry, mainly. But my reaction was total devastation. He realized at that point, seeing the horror and pain on my face, that he loved me, but felt he would look fickle if he changed his mind after everything he had done. He felt he had taken things too far with her. She had told her husband everything in order to start a life with him. He felt he had no choice but to stick to his decision, and he left. He expected to run to her and be relieved the deception was over, but although he still loved and wanted her, He suddenly could not walk away from me. Instead of going to her, my husband went to his family and friends, where he sobbed and pleaded with them to help him because he didn't know what to do. That night they met, and things felt awkward. They kissed briefly, but not passionately, and talked about finding somewhere to live. But my husband suddenly felt it wasn't right. He knew in his heart it would never work between them, but valued her friendship and didn't want to lose it. He could not see how he could to let her down. The consequences of ending it with her, upsetting her, possibly leaving her marriage in a mess, and also work in a mess, was too much. He had no idea where to turn. He came back home that night and asked if he could stay. I sent him to the spare room in a fit of rage, but then in the night I went to him and he held me. We both cried, and we made love. I wanted to believe he wanted me back. He said he was sorry, but he did not say he was staying with me. He avoided her calls for most of the following day because he did not know what he wanted to say to her. Everything was telling him to come home to me, but he could not shake the feelings he had for her. He met her after work for coffee in McDonald's, and they talked for around half an hour. He held her hands, but did not kiss her. Shortly after leaving her, I called him and told him our marriage was over. I could not stand to be someone who was waiting in the wings for him to leave the other woman. He pleaded with me and cried on the phone, but I told him I had nothing more to say. Around an hour later, he came to our house to talk and said everything was going to okay. He promised me the world, but a text from her saying, "Have you found somewhere for us to live?" sent his head into a spin again. He knew he had to end it if he wanted me, but he didn't want to let her down, and part of him still felt he could not let her go. He wished she would take the decision away from him, so when he rang her, he asked her if they were doing the right thing, but gave her the impression he thought they weren't, and she agreed. The affair was over. In the week that followed, my husband realized that he loved me more than he thought he did. He said he always knew he loved me, but he'd lost sight of how much. He said he'd taken our relationship for granted, not realizing how good it was. His feelings for her changed within a couple of days. With the benefit of distance, he saw his feelings for her for what they were: infatuation. And when he heard she'd started calling him names and bitching about him, he saw a different side to her, one not quite so attractive. When everyone else found out, they told him she was a manipulative, sex-hungry homewrecker. He realized what they had not been special at all. The connection he felt with her is what every man cheating on their wives feels with the other woman.